Hello, Malavika Srinivasan, your senior designer from Tandem NYC. I'm really excited to get to learn more about you and hear about your journey within design. We are both connected by Marcos Chavez from Toda. That is basically the reason why I am in New York City. And I would love to hear more about you. And thank you so much for coming on my podcast.
Of course, thank you so much for making some time for me, for just giving me this platform and your patient ears.
Yes, well, would you mind just explaining a little bit about where you're from, why you're in New York City, and your design journey into this world of designing and where you are now.
For sure. So I was born and brought up in Bangalore, which is in the south of India. It's a very big city, bigger than New York, I was just telling you. Um, I was sort of self-taught. I grew up in the school all about science and technology. But I was really interested in art and design, so I was kind of teaching myself on the side. One of the first software that I learned was Adobe After Effects. So I really started
Oh,
in the deep end, trying to learn motion graphics. I had this vision for like a film that I wanted to make, so I started playing around with shapes on After Effects, and then I started taught myself Illustrator and a few other software. I was always trying to like make little films or make like art or make projects. So I was always like the artsy kid in a very like nerdy school, very like science focused school. And then I applied for colleges and I came to New York City because I got into Parsons, and I studied communication design. So I went again from this like very science school to a very art heavy school. And then suddenly I was the like nerd of the group who knew how to code and like who had taught myself all these things. So it's kind of a fish out of water in both these places. Um, and yeah, I studied design. Along with being self-taught, I have a good like knowledge of design through Parsons. Did a lot of communication design, which was branding and identity work, and also worked on a lot of websites, so development work. And then um, right after college, I started working at Tandem. So that's kind of been my journey. We'll see where it goes from here.
I think it's very fascinating that you've taught yourself a lot of programs, and it's definitely very deep and advanced to jump in with After Effects. I'm still scared of After Effects, so it's still I think it's pretty impressive. And can you talk a little bit more about how being self-taught has helped you? For example, when you went to Parsons.
Yeah. I think being self-taught is helpful because I always had like a vision and I would work backwards to get to that vision. And so I would learn whatever I needed on the way and allowed that process to be really open. And I'm sure it was really scary to do it in the moment because I had nothing to go by and no professional training or no one to kind of steer me. But I think it helps me because I know how to work backwards now. I know how to wear different hats. So if tomorrow I need to build something from scratch, I sort of have an idea of how to get started or how to start teaching myself that. I've really been wanting to learn like a 3D software. And so when I find the time, I think I know like how to cobble together YouTube tutorials and some institutional knowledge and just kind of put it all together to learn. And that's been really helpful. And then whenever all my professors were fantastic in Parsons, but a lot of that work is self-directed. A lot of that work is like how much motivation you have to learn new things and pick up skills. They'll give you an assignment, but of course you have to work backwards towards getting there. So I think being self-taught helped a little bit in um, trying to find new avenues to add things into or new skills to pick up along the way that were not traditionally taught, that the professor wasn't really demanding of us. And so I could kind of weave those in. So I would find projects. I had a motion design class once, but I decided to like spin it into something a little bit more AR, VR, where you could scan and then have the motion design. Oh, because I just wanted to learn, how to use AR and how to like scan something and have the animation work. So I could kind of like work in some of this self-taught into my course curriculum and all the things that I was learning.
Within the whole scope of design, where are your passion projects? What kind of areas are you really passionate about?
That's a little bit of a hard question because I think I'm a generalist at heart, so I'm even like scared to pick a lane and tell you that this is the bubble that I'm in, but totally my passions lie in motion, so anything that moves, whether that's like an interactive website all the way to motion graphics. I used to be a dancer, so like
Oh, okay.
anything that moves, I feel like gets my gears going. So a little bit of that. And then lately at work, we've been doing a lot of branding and identity work. So I've really gotten passionate about working for people and working for clients and kind of bringing their vision and their work to life through the branding process. And then, of course, like websites, like I mentioned, um, building, seeing how interactivity works, kind of laying out that flow for people, all in a very simplified way.
Definitely, this age of video being really good at motion is definitely a good skill to have, and I'm sure it will be a lot more motion going forward.
One of my projects was just like copying motion that I saw out there. So I spent about like 20, 25 days every day just picking something and kind of just remaking it. I don't identify as a motion designer, but having picked up After Effects, I see things in motion. But yeah, it's super helpful because of that, and it helps my perspective and how I'm seeing the world through that lens. But it also helped me appreciate the work that goes into making these animations. Having studied them frame by frame or like kind of dissected how it works, I realized how complex even like 2 or 3 seconds of animation is.
Yeah, it's definitely. I've tried a little bit, but it's very, very complex for sure.
We can totally hop on another call and I will teach you or at least try to show you After Effects.
That's and then one area that I know you definitely have a lot of interest in is sustainability and climate change and that area. Would you want to talk a little bit about that?
Of course, um, I don't even know where to begin. So I've been interested in climate change from a very young age, especially coming here. I think um, I remember one of the first days that I like landed in New York, I saw that there was just trash everywhere, and that's kind of how Bangalore is too. So I saw a lot of waste. I saw a lot of the waste that I was generating, and I got really passionate about climate change and stopping that and helping the environment. I went vegan. I did as much as I could, but I realized also that our digital tools, especially, I like fell into this rabbit hole of how everything we do online also sucks power. Everything is on a server, and things are hosted, and transferring that data over to someone's laptop or mobile is consuming electricity and power. And oftentimes these are servers run by coal or non-renewable energy. So I became really passionate about that. Did a little deep dive. And I did a very quick project about a website that is sustainable. So, what are all the components from the design stage all the way to the development, all the way to the hosting? So, in design, it could be things like the colors you're using, which ones consume less energy. For example, a black screen doesn't take up as much energy. It's very marginally less. You have to like really dive into the data and like understand the science behind it, but white light just takes a little bit more energy. So reducing the brightness on your website, for example, or what kinds of colors take up more space. So all that in a design phase. How can you design with the least amount of elements, whether that's a system font, barely any like divs, things like that. So you're not piping data just for the font. And then to the development stage, like I said, you're not using heavy objects. You're kind of stripping it down. Uh, you're not putting containers inside containers inside containers. You're kind of you're designing with a lot of constraints that are very simple. And how can you still make it beautiful or convey the information that you're trying to? And then all the way to the hosting, like I mentioned, not taking up too much server space, not overloading. Where do you host your site? Where do you host your images? How much data is that piping? Where do you even put your server, right? I had a big conversation about whether if I have viewers both in India and in the US who are looking at my site, whether it's better to have the server located in the US and have all that data travel to India, or whether to have it located halfway, let's say London, where it splits across. So I did a little bit of research into that too, and I'm slowly growing passionate. I have a lot more to learn about digital sustainability. I often fall into a loop that the the most sustainable website actually doesn't exist because it's not taking up that space. So it's a little bit of an existential thing too. Like I do want to convey this information. I do want a website. So what's the least and what's the most minimal way that it can exist? Um, and maybe it is consuming server space to educate other people to consume less server space as well.
I see that the challenge there with it takes a least amount of energy of not having one, but then also then you can not provide that education to other people
Mhm.
that so I see that loop. Yeah. So speaking about that, you're also passionate about design education and how really that could be used to teach the new generation of designers. Would you like
Absolutely.
to talk a little bit about that?
Yes. During COVID, I took a gap year and I went back to Bangalore to spend some time with my family, um, but also because I wasn't interested in learning um, design in New York when I wasn't in New York. So in that year, I actually worked with a huge education tech company, and they teach very similar to the education that I received, a very STEM focused education, very much science and math, but they were trying to pivot a little bit to the arts. And so I was a curriculum designer. I helped test and design curricula for kids to learn art and design. So I'd always been passionate about education. I still want to be a teacher at some point. Um, but then I realized that I'm more passionate about teaching people how to design and teaching people how to see the world from that lens because it is that such a multidisciplinary approach. For me to understand digital sustainability, I had to dive into these research papers and some science and some math and also code, like understanding how to develop sites. And so understanding this multifaceted approach that design takes is something that I really passionate about. And I realized that as I was working there, I also worked with a very small niche education company here in New York. So that was very helpful for me to understand how we can go from really big scale to small scale teaching. And I was also a tutor at Parsons. So I would sit with kids my age and teach them software like After Effects. And and it was just a collaborative process, I think. And so sharing that education, sharing that knowledge about design um, is exciting me, but also really helpful because I don't think it should be caged or education shouldn't be a resource. Having taught myself, but also having this like really fantastic education from Parsons, I see sort of both worlds and I see the benefit of that. And I'm really hoping to make that a little bit more accessible.
Now, are there some specific areas where you would like to kind of tweak education within design?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, like introducing design from a young age like I had feels like a starting point, but I don't quite know how to start there or do something like that. But even at a college level, introducing design into other people's thinking, not just designers, I think that's a good starting point. And teaching people how to see the world a little bit more from a design perspective um, feels like the move. But I'm still getting off the ramp with those ideas and how we can share that. And for now, maybe it's just like a blog post or two, or it's like teaching my friends how to use Figma, for example. I think that's a good starting point too, because it just makes it a little bit more accessible.
When you were a tutor at Parsons, while also being a student, what did that teach you? Wearing two hats, basically teaching your fellow students. Did you learn something specific from that experience?
Yeah, that's a good question, and my answer is of course cliche. Uh, every teacher is always like, you learn more when you're teaching, and I think it's very, very true. I spent so much time with my peers kind of identifying what they were having trouble with in their classes. Like they would complain that maybe a professor wasn't touching on a subject that they really needed to know, or that, for example, our creative coding class was a little bit too detailed for them to even get the basics of coding. So we'd have these conversations and I could see the holes in the system that were there, but I also learned so much how to talk to my peers, how to collaborate with them to a point where I wasn't doing their assignments, of course, but also understanding their perspectives and kind of showing them how little things work. And it was such a fun time. I could just spend time with new people and kind of understand. At some point, that tutoring also turned into giving workshops to other classes. So I would guest workshop and teach some of the students. And every now and then I would have a session with a professor who was having trouble with a certain software. Um, and it wasn't as complex as After Effects, but it would be a professor trying to understand Illustrator, trying to even keep up with the times. So it was quite an interesting experience. But honestly, the most fruitful thing was just seeing people have this like light go off in their heads when I like simplified something and they're like, oh yeah, okay, that's not so hard. And I of course learn how to be a little bit more articulate with what I was trying to say, or learn how to be a little bit more patient, of course, and just kind of have a teacher's mindset where everything is up for grabs and it's just knowledge. So there's no gatekeeping. It's just about sharing and giving as much as you can.
Especially now these days with YouTube and online resources and AI, it's all out there, but it can be overwhelming and where to start. So
Yeah, that and I think content is so quick and what could be a 1 hour tutorial is now in like 30 seconds, right? It's like how to most efficiently do this thing. But I think learning often comes from patience and taking your time and really letting that understanding click and those little steps kind of make sense in your head. So you're absolutely right with like AI and all of this. Not only is there so much more information at your fingertips, it's also much quicker and you have to grasp things a lot faster.
yeah, and it keeps moving, and
Yeah.
but also sometimes it's just overwhelming, and sometimes you don't need all that information. You just need to focus on that one thing just for now. Uh, So I want to learn a little bit more about what you do at Tandem NYC. I know you do a lot of work with organizations and nonprofits and NGOs. So would you share a little bit about what kind of work you do at Tandem?
Well, Tandem is a communication design studio, and that's a very reductive way of explaining what we do. But if I had to talk to my mom about it, I'd be like, yeah, I'm just a communication designer. So we do a lot of branding and we do a lot of websites mainly. But along with that is a lot of strategy. And so the people that we work for are often nonprofit or advocacy orgs, sometimes activists, people whose values we really care about, and people who are working to make the world a better place. And all we do is give them the tools to do what they do best. So we're not changing lives, but hopefully we're giving people the opportunity to do so and make sure that their communication needs are met so that they can do the good work out there. As a designer at Tandem, we're a very small studio, so I wear a lot of hats. It is, again, in my nature to be a generalist, and here I really am. So I go all the way from strategy to making decisions before a project starts and while the project is just getting started with a lot of research and understanding. We often like interview our clients and the groups around the people that they're working with to kind of humanize the organizations and understand them a little bit better. So I'm involved in that stage. And then, of course, the design work, which is like branding, identity work, putting all of those into visuals. Sometimes we often do like verbal guidelines and voice and tone and understand their comms needs completely. And then I do also do a lot of development. So that's building websites, producing, doing all of the production as well. So I think it's a great opportunity for me to be doing a bunch of things, all the way from strategy, design, development.
Yeah, because you can kind of, when you have the initial meeting and working on strategy and you have probably a budget to adhere to, and then you have a timeline, then you know that, oh, I'm a strategist now and a brand designer now, but 2 weeks I will be the developer. So we can't really do that because you doesn't. So is it confusing sometimes, or is it mainly a big help to have all those hats on?
Of course, it's confusing because I'm often writing emails or like switching tasks very quickly in my head, but it is so helpful to see the bigger picture, right? Sometimes when you're developing the website, you can lose focus on what exactly the website is meant to do. So you can get caught up in the details and having that macro view, having done the design, having done the strategy, having understood the organization at such a deep level, I think helps so much to make a good product or make a good brand for them. Um, and so I think at the end of the day, it's so helpful because you can see all those moving parts and you kind of go from this like macro view to this micro view when you're designing a very specific thing, whether that's like a letterhead template, for example, and you want all the pixels to be perfect, all the way to like the entire thing, and you're seeing such a big picture, um, and how all of those parts connect. So it can be confusing only because you're running through a lot of things and a lot of tasks every now and then, or you're switching different parts of your brain. But it's very satisfying when they all kind of click.
Do you pick certain days? Now I'm the developer, now I'm the strategist, or do you kind of like structure your day with different blocks?
That's such a good question. Um, it's often dependent on the composition of the clients at our studio and also the timelines and how those intersect. So I think there have been months where I've not done any development work, but there have also been months where I do all of them. Um, and it is a little bit tricky because when I wear that development hat, I'm kind of in a hole. I'm just trying to get from point A to point B, and that's building a website. Whereas when strategy is a little bit more abstract, there's no real end point. Things are kind of floating. So I've started structuring my days a little bit about stacking the development in the beginning when there's development work and when there's a lot, especially. And then kind of doing some more of the thinking work in the background as I'm having like a more logical um, project that's the development. I can use the other side of my brain that's like thinking, letting things marinate, sit on it. So it's a very interesting question, and I'm gonna take that with me into the next few weeks and actually see how I'm doing it. It often ends up just being a rapid response where I'm doing the thing that needs to be done.
Yeah, I was just thinking about my own project sometimes. It also
Mhm.
depends on the day you have. Sometimes that's a really good day for open collaboration and brainstorming. And some days I just want to listen to a podcast and do production work with print work all day. It's a very different type of work. Now just print production, like it's just about resolution, sizes, and font.
Mhm.
The next day can be collaboration, brainstorming with a person, and it's just very two different days.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Do you like to mix them in too?
I think I prefer to just okay, I'm gonna take half a day just doing production.
Yeah.
It's just so different, and it very much depend on the day form. Like,
Mhm.
what kind of energy do I have today? But sometimes you don't have that luxury when you have a client meeting, right? So
It's totally a microscopic view, especially when it's print stuff. Like you're looking at every single color, every single pixel, and making sure that it's all perfect. So yeah, I understand blocking it out. I'm gonna think about this a little bit more, and how I'm structuring my days.
sometimes it's nice to have something that has an answer. Okay, it needs more resolution. I
Yeah.
can do this. Sometimes you don't have that with, oh, we feel that the logo is not right. Like, what does that
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
So
you're so right. Development totally feels like point A to point B. Like I know the design, I just have to make it look like the design. And like the structure is all kind of inbuilt. We've done all the work. But then when you're in the branding phase and the client's like, okay, the logo needs to look more poppy, more spicy. You're like, I don't know where to start. Yeah.
yeah. Do you find that there's some specific challenges that comes up with nonprofits, those kind of organizations that you don't see in more commercial clients?
One of the most easy answer for me to say is that they have lower budgets. We're often working with people who don't really have the means to hire us or are going out of their way to do a rebrand or something like that. So they often come with limited budgets, and that's a little bit harder. But we love doing that work. And so we really believe in the people. And so maybe it's a little bit of extra time that's unaccounted for, but we're getting them some help. And then I think it's people who are also under resourced because they're nonprofits or advocacy orgs. They themselves don't have communications managers or people who can help them, even like a social media manager or people who can help them with their branding. So once we give them those toolkits, it's often hard for them to even use those. So a lot of the challenge comes in like simplifying, similar to the digital sustainability, simplifying as much as you can and giving them very reduced things, but that are extremely usable and friendly and exciting for people to use. So there is a little bit of challenge in like we want these like beautiful complex brands with several image treatments and like things that can flex from small to big and like scale in different ways and these large color palettes and all of these things that us designers love. But then there are people who are using the brand who don't really know how to do that or what a tint or a shade is and like how to utilize that. So that can be a challenge sometimes. And of course, it's not discouraging where we don't want to work with these people anymore because they don't have the tools. It's in fact more encouraging because we want to give them something that they're excited about. So I think those are the two main things, working with a limited budget, meeting those needs there, and then meeting communications needs as much as possible.
I'm sure it gives a lot of purpose to work on all of these causes that you believe in and think that makes the world a better place.
Yeah. Um, and then the only other thing that I can think of is the clients themselves finding the time to talk to us. It is such a deep research process, and it's like understanding them completely. But they're also busy and they're also out there doing the work, right? So them having found the time to give us the attention um, and like really co-create with us, because again, it is a collaboration and we're working with them to give them something that they need. So that can often be a challenge, is like really understanding the organization at its core from a little bit of the outside.
That's something I definitely see is very, very important, that the client has time to be involved in collaboration, because it's really key to understand what I'm doing. I need to understand what they're doing. So
Yeah.
do you sometimes go and visit those organizations and kind of see, maybe meet some of the people that they're helping? That's something you do as part of the research?
We used to, I wasn't at the studio before COVID, but most of their meetings were in person and they always really met the organization. We traveled to Atlanta once to really engage with the client that we were working in. So all of that. But all that being said, now most of the work we do is on Zoom. We really try, especially in the beginning of our process, to get in touch with the executive director of the organization all the way down to the volunteers, and try to find everybody and at least have half-hour interviews with them, if not sitting down for an hour, asking them a bunch of questions completely unrelated to design or the branding or where they see the organization going from a comms perspective, but just from the day-to-day work that they're doing. Who are they interacting with? Like really understanding the orgs. Sometimes we do interact with the audiences or who they're trying to talk to as well. And that's always the most fruitful, because you really understand who they're speaking to and how they're receiving that and perceiving the organization. So we have this deep research process. We're really talking to everyone as much as we can. And that's when we really humanize the organization. We see the people behind it. We're getting to know them. And that's when I think we do our best work. Like you said, we can kind of scurry off and go into this whole and do the whole branding and come to them and show them a logo. And they're going to be like, this isn't us. Like, this doesn't represent us. This isn't what we're about. So collaborating with them from the very beginning and having these little checkpoints and seeing every step of the way, kind of bringing them on board and like co-creating, I think that's where we found the most success.
Yeah. And also having them be invested and also on board with the direction, so they can take it and run with it, even
Yeah.
within a small little team.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to touch a little bit on using data and how to visualize data and knowledge management. Is that something that you can share a little bit about, how you work with data and how to visualize data?
Of course. Have you heard of Obsidian by any chance? It's like a knowledge management tool. Okay. So I was really interested in all the notes from the books that I was reading and how they all connected. So I would read and I would note things down. Something was related to philosophy. And then a different author would talk about another author. So I would see that those two are connected. And so I started seeing a lot of links between the books that I was reading, both going towards those and going backwards. So a book will contain a bunch of references, but those references are also sort of linked to the book, right? And I started seeing this vision of like connecting and building this graph of knowledge that I have in my head from all of these books. And that's where I started with this data visualization project. It ended up being just a website that's very similar to this tool called Obsidian. It even looks very similar because it's kind of it's it's a more interactive way to represent my website. But I was so interested in just seeing how my thoughts connected. And this often happens at Tandem too, where I'm working on a project, but I see how it links to a certain concept or a certain author or even a certain politician, let's say. And so everything's kind of interconnected. And I started seeing that and really feeling that and embodying it. And what I did was ended up visualizing that knowledge into sort of a graph where you can see what books link to what lines are referenced, like anything. So I would tag things as philosophy or religion, for example. And then I would start seeing connections that I wouldn't have if I hadn't visualized that data. So 3 months later, I would go to the website and you'd be like, oh wait, so this book talks about this thing about religion, and then this other book also sort of makes that same connection, but in a completely different way. Or I noticed a lot of patterns in my thinking where I was drawn towards text about philosophy or a certain like concept. And so I could see all of these patterns. I've always loved data and data visualization. I did a project about visualizing pain, not everybody can kind of talk about their pain and you can sort of feel it. And so the art that came out of it, that visualization was really beautiful and it was really visceral, but you couldn't quite tell. It was sort of mapping out the pain points in your body. And I talked to a bunch of people and sort of like plotted them out. And so you end up with this graph that's actually really like human as well because of the data that it's made up by. Um, so I've always been interested in like bringing bringing a little bit of more humanness to the data that we work with. All these numbers can be confusing and like um, it's all science and it feels like a lot of statistics. But there's something so beautiful in making art out of that or even hand drawing that data.
I think it's so interesting, the data world, and then plotting in your thoughts alongside with the books, and then work with humans. It's all kind of blends together. It's very fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And the pain project too um was sort of this like mapping of the pain in your body, which of course gives you human error. Like not everyone's going to exactly tell you where their wrist is hurting, for example, right? You sort of get a general sense. And so part of this like humanizing data is accounting for that error or even visualizing that potential error. Sometimes I might tag a certain line in a book or a certain thought wrong, but that's kind of part of it, right? That's the exciting part. That's what makes it human.
I it made me think about AI. So I'm sure there's ways to use AI to see those patterns even more, make them even more visible.
Yeah.
Have you thought about doing that? And also, how do you use AI in your work these days?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Um, we've been trying to experiment with a little bit more AI. I'm hoping to like start playing around with Cursor. I think it's helpful because I have a sort of base level knowledge of code that I can use AI to kind of slap over it. But um, honestly, we're using AI to make our workflow a little bit faster. And so less about the creative work or generating things or even ideas because that's sort of a human thing. But honestly, going into Photoshop and removing a background, that's going to make our workflow faster. I think it's a great idea. I haven't really thought about integrating AI into the knowledge management projects or like my website. It's interesting and I'm really excited by it. Like you can already see me like planning how I would do that or like what I would learn from that. But at the same time, I think there's this value in me being the one to make those connections or sort of find those patterns because that's really the exciting thing. If I just feed it, I'm going to get a bunch of data that's like, okay, these are all your patterns, you know? But that's not as exciting or serendipitous as like stumbling upon a pattern that I see in the way that I'm thinking and kind of understanding that versus a list of AI generated patterns or calculations that it's made. Of course, there's AI error, but I think there's something so nice about the human error versus the AI machine mistakes.
I think it's a very good point. I spoke to Michael a few weeks ago, and he said he will not use AI for copywriting because he loves copywriting. So
Mm,
why would he give his passion away to a robot? And I
exactly.
think that is a good point.
At the end of the day, we're doing it to work faster, but if we're doing it to do the work, then we're exactly what Michael probably said is we're not going to do the work and that's kind of boring. Like I enjoy working with these people. I enjoy creating identities for them, creating websites for them. If I've got AI to do all of that for me, absolutely right. Like that passion is lost too. But if I can harness AI, I don't want to I hope I'm not one of those people who are kind of shunning it out because I think there's a power in it and there's a sort of there's something that we can learn from that. There's a tool right there inbuilt. I see a lot of my friends building iOS apps or like websites with no knowledge of how to code. And that's so exciting because they have a platform for their visions or they have these really creative ideas and there are all these roadblocks. As a designer, you see you have taste and there's a huge gap between what you're able to execute and bringing that closer is so much more exciting. So definitely what Michael probably said is absolutely right. Like that passion is still there and you need to keep that going. But there's always ways to make it a little bit easier or enhance your workflow or kind of integrate it in slow ways. We recently had a project, and it was so easy to synthesize some data using AI versus manually creating a chart out of that data. And it was a lot of information and a lot of data that was happening in real time, but it was so easy to just use AI to quickly synthesize some of that. That doesn't mean we didn't take that and strategize using that data, or we took it for face level. We obviously fact checked it, and then we use our creative intuition and our strategy kind of as a top layer to synthesize that data.
Yeah, I think it's very much about finding the right ways to use it and the right time to use it, and then use it and then not use it when it doesn't make sense to
Exactly.
use. So I think we're all kind of trying to find that balance.
Hmm.
I'm always interested in speaking to people that are from different areas of the world. And now I know you grew up in India and lived in the US. What is kind of the main differences that you can see in those two cultures? Like, have you noticed a few areas where you think this is really different?
Yeah. When I first came to the US, of course, I see it now. I didn't see it at the time, but I was a little bit culture shocked. Um, I grew up in a very big city too, so comparable to New York City in its size, but there was something very different in the way that people talked and the way that they were hustling all the time. Like it definitely felt like a rat race. Whereas Bangalore is a little bit more laid back and very chill. There's a lot of people. But I think that's what inspired me to do advocacy work because all of that is on your face in India, right? You're seeing people on the streets all the time. You kind of see the difference between the rich and the poor. Like you're seeing that economic disparity. You're seeing a lot of dissonance in the kinds of people there are. So that's something that I found quite different when I came here, but also inspired to continue doing that work and just work for social justice because people are so different and differently privileged in different areas. And then I think the other thing is India has this very joint family structure. Everything feels collective and collaborative, and you're not fighting for yourself, but you're fighting for your family or your larger family, and everything just feels shared, and there's this ownership over everything, and there's no sense of individualism. You're not you're not thinking that you're the best. You're not thinking that you're like one in a million. You're thinking that you're one in a billion in a very different concept, right? You're just another person trying to make a livelihood. Um, and so when I came here, I think keeping that mindset has been really helpful, especially at Tandem where it's so collaborative and the space is shared, right? We share these values, we share all of this with each other. And so being possessive about your design ideas and a crit isn't going to take you a long way, but being open and seeing that there's no individualism, what could be a sort of spark in my idea, someone else can take and create something really beautiful out of it. And then someone else can take something from them and kind of spin it off. And there's this like really collaborative process. And I see often sometimes that it's easy to spin into this individualism here where you like think that you're the best and like it is about you. Um, but growing up in India has really opened that side of my brain where like nothing is really mine, but at the same time, everything is mine, you know? And it's a very liberating feeling.
It makes a lot of sense. Is your team at Tandem, is that very international? Is it a very diverse team?
Absolutely. We often find international people moving in and out of the studio, and 3 out of the 4 of us full-timers are international. We've been in the US for maybe 7 years minimum, but we still have these backgrounds from Asia and other countries. So yeah, it's very interesting to think about how we work in American politics, but we're not from here. I was listening to another interview of a colleague, and she had this really profound thing. She said, it feels like a civic duty. She can't vote here, so she helps people vote here. Or it feels like that's how she is doing her duty to the country. Because she cannot make a change by voting, she can educate people to vote, for example, or to do their civic duties. And that was a really beautiful thing that stuck with me. And I think, yeah, it's interesting because we bring this outside perspective to America and we see it for what it's great about, but we're also seeing it for its flaws. And we bring that side of it. We also bring this international side where we can work with different cultures and a lot of diversity too. So we're not kind of stuck in this lane, I think. And we all kind of check each other because we're from different places and we have different values and we hold different things close. A language that I might use might be different for something that someone else might use, but we're still kind of sharing and we're finding this middle ground. So I think it feels funny that we work in American politics or we work for American advocacy, even though we're not from here. But I think it's also, like I was saying, a little bit liberating. We have a stake, but we also don't have a stake in it. We have this like collectivist perspective, and it's not so individualistic. This colleague that I'm talking about, she has no design style as such. And that makes her so flexible and create the most beautiful things because she really embodies the people that she's working with. Um, and I think often the international people don't really have a style or a design thing that they're focused on. It's often generalists or people who really can adapt and be a little bit flexible. You know what it's like to be sort of an immigrant. You know what it's like to code switch, right? My accent is a little bit different today than it is when I'm talking to my Indian friends. You know how to switch on and off those different parts of your brain. And so I think at the studio, we really harness the code switching and the diversity and meeting each other in the middle, even though we have mixed languages.
That's very, very interesting that you have the ability to even change your accent. One thing I've been fascinated about lately, I believe I've figured out the meaning of life. To me, is to make mistakes. So I think I'm gonna start at some point do a podcast about the mistakes I've made within the last 3 months. Can you point to a specific mistake you have done within the design space that you think you learned the most from?
That's a really good question. I feel like you're right. I make mistakes all the time. I'm sure I forget something here and there and miss a step or two. But my brain is spinning out into the mistakes that were actually good in a way. I've been really nervous about moving to the States, and I often would regret it. I had one foot out the door, and especially when I first came, I was like, "Mom, Dad, I'm gonna drop out. I just want to come back home." And I often thought that it was a big mistake. I was like, this is not working. But I think it's one of the best mistakes that I've made. Uh, is is understanding the education here. I think I have the opportunity whenever I'm ready to go back in India and kind of give back there, do the same thing that I'm doing here over there. But right now, I think this is the place to be. It seemed like a mistake, but it really wasn't. I don't know if that answers your question.
I think it's a great answer. Is there something that we haven't spoken about that you would like to touch on?
I don't think so. I mean, you're welcome to ask more questions. I'm just really grateful to be here. We kind of touched on a lot of topics.
Yeah, I think we spoke about the background, sustainability,
Yeah.
the design education, working with nonprofits, data visualization, I think, mistakes. So where can people find you and get in touch with you if they want to learn more about what you're doing?
I mean, my first instinct is to shout out Tandem.NYC. That's Tandem's website. You can see all the projects that we've worked on. We do a lot of cultural work, political work, like I mentioned, nonprofit and advocacy. So you'll find maybe groups that you recognize and probably groups that you don't. And that's one place that you can find some of my work. And then other than that, I have a website that's malavikainmotion.com. It's constantly changing because I can't quite figure out what it is, but hopefully it's extremely sustainable and lightweight, so it should load fast. And then on Instagram, I'm Masalavika. It's a little pun. Masalavika.
Very nice. I'm going to put those in the show notes so we could put links to both Tandem and to your websites.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marco, for having me. I'm so grateful to be talking to you, and I want to hear more about your mistakes and all the good things that you've been doing.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on, and I think I learned a lot, and I look forward to learning more about what you're doing at Tandem. And again, thank you for your time.
Thank you.